All right, I want to spend a little bit of time and go through Vasari for a moment and just how he's going to play out in this unit, which is, he's going to basically be the foundation of things, but you're not going to have to read the book, so don't worry about that too much. And that's him right there. He was an artist in the Renaissance, in the late Renaissance, and he was brilliant in the fact that he thought that individuals, artists, mattered. Up until his time, artists weren't really considered to be, as they weren't revered like they are today, for being individuals. No artist would have been known for his work of arts very well, if at all. Vasari made the person of the artist into something, I would say something of a celebrity, but not really, somebody to be revered and admired for their intelligence, their care, and their insight into the aesthetics of their work of art. Before Vasari came along, they simply did not care about individual artists. These people were really on the border between craftsmen and what today we recognize as artists, but they were more or less known as craftsmen, is really what they were thought of. But Vasari separated that aspect of their personality and accentuated it and showed that they were much more concerned with things that were different than what regular craftsmen would be concerned with. That they were concerned with aesthetics, they had real lives. And what he did on top of that was to create a narrative that we now know and assume to be basically valid. But it's very important to know that he put the basic narrative together. He was in what he called, and he gave it the name, of the Renaissance. That means rebirth. So he gave that period he lived in that name. And he gave the Middle Ages that name. That was a time, an age, in between his own Renaissance and the classical period. The period of Roman and Greek art in its innovations, which were, from his perspective, magnificent. And so what he saw, he put a world timeline together, and it's very important to know that this was not in existence before Vasari. People didn't look at their history that way. It was seen as the Greeks and Romans came first. That was, from his perspective, the birth of civilization. That is an extraordinarily naive perspective, but we can understand why he did that. It takes no account of Mesopotamia and other aspects of world civilizations, but okay. So Vasari saw himself at the height of that progression that started with the Greeks and Romans, went through a downturn in the Middle Ages, and then accelerated to the achievements of his own time period. So he saw it all leading up to it. That is an approach to history called a teleology. It has a beginning, middle, and end point. And his end point is his time, the artist around him. He did not self-aggrandize himself. He aggrandized his time period. He saw people such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo as the height of artistic achievement in giving insight into the nature of the human soul that you could not get anywhere else from any other type of endeavor. So that's what he see, and that's what he composed in his Lives of the Eminent Artists, Lives of the Artists. That's what he put together. It was not done before. And now let me go to the book. I know a few of you, a couple of you have emailed me and told me that you had trouble with the PDF. I'm going to go to the PDF. It doesn't give my computer trouble, but I do know more than one of you have had trouble. So what I did, and I'll go back to the PDF in a moment. I have put together a link at the Gutenberg files. The Gutenberg Project puts together an enormous number of texts are available online through the Gutenberg. And they've literally been available since the 90s. Okay, I remember reading Oedipus on Gutenberg. So that's literally how long. This is the founding of the internet. literally before they had web pages. This was on the internet. It wasn't on the web. It was on the internet. There is actually a distinction. Let's not get into it now. But this is a slightly different. This is a different translation, but it doesn't matter. You will still find the exact same artist covered. It's the same. It might be a different translation, but it's the same content. You get the preface and everything else. And going about a quarter of the way in, you will see it's going to start up with Giotto and others. Now, you do not need to read, or Cimabue is the first one I believe was covered. You do not need to read this work cover to cover. That is not the goal. What I do want you to do is, like I just did, come down to Cimabue and just read a little bit about him and go, yeah, he's kind of interesting. And then go on to the next artist and, see if you kind of like him or, the other artist. And just go through these. And I don't know much about Lapa, but he is one of the artists in here. And you should find somebody that you think is interesting for whatever reason. You think this person is interesting. What I would rather you not do is pick one of the famous artists, such as Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, or even Titian. Titian's very well known. He did not have a very positive view of Titian, by the way. Titian, composed artwork more in what was called the Gothic style. And Vasari did not appreciate the Gothic style, which seemed more formalized. But no matter. Titian has since been recognized as one of the greatest artists. Raphael is one of the others. So all I want you to do is flip through this and get some idea of an artist, and just a little bit. These are little background sketches. They're not, as you should know by now after going through the Showa unit, it's a primary source. He knew many of these people. He didn't know all of them. He didn't know the artists he covered from from the medieval period, from the late 1200s into the 1300s. He lived after them. But he did know of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and the tension between them. He knew these things. So he's a primary source. He has definite biases throughout. As you learned when we did the Showa unit, there is no such thing as an objective source. He's also seriously hobbled by a lack of, resource materials and other things. He didn't have access to resources on his on his portraits, so he wrote basically what had been handed down to him, what he had heard, what somebody had told him. That's exactly what he did. That's not the most reliable method of writing biographies, as he did. He also had his own axes to grind, and it sometimes comes out in his portraits. But he's known as really the father of art history, and the father of the notion that artists were different somehow, and had to be trained, and had to have insight into things that other people wouldn't have necessarily. So he is the beginning of it. So he should be the launching pad for you to take a look into the medieval and the Renaissance period. Now, one thing I want to make you aware of is don't worry if you don't want to write on a religious painter. And don't worry if you do. Either way is fine. What I don't want you to do is to project your own religious perspective onto the artwork. I want to be very clear. I don't want you to project your own religious perspective or convictions onto the artwork. In no way should this be challenging or confirming your own religious perspectives. That should never come up. The reality is that for the most of human history, artwork worked with religious themes. It just did. So that's part of it, but you don't use it to either challenge or confirm your own perspectives. All I want you to do with this is to find an artist who somehow piques your interest, and that's what you're going to get from Vasari. is just, this is like a Renaissance Wikipedia is what it is. It's just quick little portraits. They're not the most reliable, but find somebody you find interesting. I would add Botticelli probably to that list of people you should probably avoid, just because there's so much out there. So find one of the artists you want to write about, and then start exploring. And then on one of the next videos, I'll show you how to find the artwork to write about. Okay? Take care, you guys.